is actually the roadmap. Turn off. On these particular use cases from the perspective of how desirable is it? What kind of impact would it have on you or the industry? And what is your perception on the feasibility or the effort to put in place some of these BIM and GIS use cases? Before we get into that though, maybe just a little bit about the importance of BIM.
So I think there's a lot. So I think the use cases that Marc mentioned, but maybe before we go there, Marc, I do want to, any questions or thoughts on the, or any questions you have on the roadmap, or about when you can see it, what's in it? Does anybody have any general comment on it? Because we are talking about, yes, please.
Who's the owner of the roadmap?
Who is the owner? Yeah, it's a good.
Your companies, or is it?
No, I think the owner will be ultimately, it's a joint working group that will drive the roadmap between buildingSMART and OGC. That's yet to be formed. So the roadmap has just been published, so we are handing over a product with clear timelines and objectives, and we hope in the next few months that we'll form that working group, drawn from membership within this community. So if you're interested to drive that effort forward, certainly you read it first, and if you're interested, certainly you can voice your interest to buildingSMART. Similarly, OGC has 4 working groups that are, including the digital twinning working group, that Marc is also a part of, that they are collecting interest from their community. We'll form the joint group, and then the plan is to meet often, prioritize use cases, and then actually get to toolkit development. And toolkits don't only mean software toolkits, it's including legal contract documents for information continuity and things of that sort. So yes, so the owner will be ultimately the joint working group is our hope.
We have a national working group in the Netherlands. So
we know. Please, yes. The GeoBIM effort, has been very strong in the Netherlands, and Francesca Noarda and other Jantine. I think so. We do have a session later this month in depth.
They're already involved?
They are involved in this. So they were one of the 15 people we had on the committee, especially Francesca. So yes, any other thoughts, any other questions on the road? It's very important because that's the foundation on which we're building. So I know a lot of you have not seen it, so it's, if you have thoughts. Okay, so, on BIM, the topic, BIM and GIS have really come together. When you look at a road project or a rail project today, it's almost, the information as far as location is concerned and the detail, you can actually pretty much take that to GIS tooling today, right? I mean, everybody knows that. So the BIM domain is certainly very aware, especially I come from the horizontal and linear infrastructure. We can't think of doing BIM without thinking about GIS simultaneously. So it's almost, our use cases are very rich. What you'll see today are things that are real, actually, that are happening. So we are not covering every use case, obviously, in the time we have. From a BIM perspective, when you see the use cases, think of those as generalized use cases that are for every building project. Requires planning, requires construction collaboration, requires inspection, requires handover, requires management. There is nothing in BIM that is not connected to GIS as far as I'm concerned, especially on linear infrastructure. I think it's the same of buildings as well, so in other domains. So that's the quick introduction.
And then the importance of GIS, Erik, do you want to elaborate on just?
We got this mixed up. So he did BIM, I did GIS, and we're switching things. That's good. That's good. Well, I think Jack said it. It's location and it's object information. It's products. And what I found interesting over the past couple of months and years around these discussions is these sort of the concepts and the domains are different, but they're at the end they aim the same thing. So this notion of use case in the building domain or in the buildings domain is also looked at as a service in the GIS domain. So there's been a lot of work around semantic alignment, around concepts, trying to figure out how do we speak sort of a common language. And I think a lot of this work around the roadmap is to try to align these questions. And so of course buildings are situated in space. So you can't have a building, you can't have an asset, a point asset without having a location. So, and it's funny because I'm an architect as a background, and we don't, we're not trained in GIS. We don't think of that, but as it becomes, more and more prevalent, as we try to connect our cities, try to connect our buildings, location is inevitable. So,
as we often say, everything gets planned, designed, built, or operated somewhere. And that somewhere is typically the GIS side of things. So your role and your responsibility for this session to be successful is to utilize the cards that are either in front of you or on your seat, hopefully in your hands. The number of your card doesn't matter. These probably look familiar to most everyone if you've ever played the game Uno, but let's not get into copyright issues with Mattel. Gonna go through these use cases and going to ask you to weigh in by showing a card, by raising your hand. The buildingSMART blue card means the topic is very interesting to you, to the AEC industry, very impactful to the work that you do and those who work around you. And we're gonna give reminders many times of the colors and what they mean. Let's call that buildingSMART cyan or light green. Somewhat interesting. You think it'll make an impact, but maybe it's not the top of the list. Purple, it's not very interesting to the AEC industry. The workflow that we're talking about maybe is a niche workflow that we've thrown out there just to get conversation going. But as far as GIS and BIM coming together, purple would indicate it really isn't all that impactful. And red might be that we show a use case on urban design and you just have no understanding, no vote, essentially. So red is abstain. It's a no vote. So again, blue, really important, greenish color, middle of the road, purple, no, not very impactful, and red is no vote. So I don't have to explain that again. Blue, green, purple, red. And I'll just maybe to tease you a little bit, at the end, we actually will pop up a QR code for you to submit your info because we've got 18 of these decks to give out, complete decks for 18 of you to go home and play Uno with buildingSMART branded cards at the end. Okay, so our first use case in the topic of GIS kind of making its way into a BIM application or a BIM environment. We call this a limited scope design development. Maybe it's a single building on a site. It's an off-ramp, a single intersection in a city that is being enriched, that's being redone, that's being redeveloped, or being maybe developed from greenfield. To enhance limited scope project design processes, delivering GIS data, enabling better informed design phase decisions based on existing conditions. So maybe just with a show of cards and, this will spur some conversation. This idea of somewhat limited scope. Yeah, hold your cards up. I'm seeing a few there. Yeah, we need to see them to know, kind of, gauging the audience. We've got one red card in the back, no vote. Otherwise, a lot of blues, a few purples. We have a microphone that we could maybe have. Okay, keep them up. Okay, so a little mix of dark blue and greenish. He's got a blue card, okay. I saw someone hold up the purple card. I'm curious, let's maybe go with the outlier. Who was the head of purple card? That blue, purple. Okay. We have a microphone that we could,
Yes.
Okay. Purple? Purple meaning this isn't interesting. This doesn't have an impact. I think I saw a couple folks towards the back. Anyone want to weigh in why they think this is, maybe an outlier, why a limited scope project wouldn't gain from BIM and GIS? I know I saw someone with a purple card. I'm sorry? Colorblind people. It could have been someone who's colorblind and didn't recognize what card they held up. I mean, this seems to be, I would say, to use the phrase, bread and butter The majority of work, I would think, at least in vertical construction or even small infrastructure work, is this limited scope. Not an entire campus. We'll get into that in a minute. Not an entire highway corridor. That's one of our use cases as well. But as far as bringing GIS information into a BIM environment to better design a building, to better design a corridor, to understand the underlay of GIS, giving you more context, perhaps utility information, basics of terrain. Again, it seemed like that was just middle of the road at best. Okay. Let me move on to the next one. Large scale development. So here, entire corridors, subdivisions, campus scale. Again, design-oriented processes being improved by bringing GIS, which again would be, presented as a map, but likely many layers. Not just geographic layers, but maybe demographics, understanding context from the perspective of traffic flow, or where competition might be, or where the environmental concerns are. So bringing together that GIS under your BIM tools to better design, so early in the process, your project, make better engineering decisions for these larger scale projects. Again, blue, important, green, middle of the road. Flip your card around. Okay, so this is much more weighing towards more importance. So I can maybe make a very early assumption that the larger projects, there's a perception that BIM and GIS coming together is more important. That's maybe a big assumption to make after only 2 data points, but why not? Let's draw some early conclusions. Anyone want to weigh in on why they might have voted differently for the smaller scale and found more important for larger scale projects?
There's someone.
Marc. You can always count on Marc to share his opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that it's critical in a large scale to blend BIM and GIS. I think in a smaller scale development, it is possible to handle the data maybe just within a BIM environment, particularly if it's spatially coordinated correctly. So you can't do it all in the BIM for the large scale. And that's where you need to kind of democratize the data sets across different systems. Whereas in a smaller scale, it's potentially handleable within a single environment.
Yeah, good answer. Can kind of stating the obvious maybe that we all were thinking, but yeah, appreciate you expressing that.
But there are exceptions. But that's
Certainly, yeah, there are exceptions. Perhaps the more complex the project, a data center in the middle of an urban environment with everything that it has to connect to could be more complicated than a green field that's of large scale. Okay. And a third topic, still in the area of GIS data, GIS layers, GIS views coming into a BIM environment, a BIM authoring type environment. So using GIS as a means of understanding context of the subsurface conditions. So what's going on underground that you might not be able to see, immediately. Again, informing the design and engineering of what's going on above ground, but perhaps below ground as well. So again, vote with your cards. Dark blue important, green middle of the road, purple really doesn't matter, and red is your no vote.
yeah, and if I can just contextualize this a little bit, I think as Marc said, subsurface is anything that you can't see. Think of utility engineering, for example. Think of other things that are site related. You can think of hydrology and hydraulics information. It doesn't just have to be subsurface utility engineering. So I know this is just a surrogate. It's not an exhaustive list, but the imagination can go wild, and you'll have a chance to weigh in on the specific story you might have.
Yeah, I'm hoping this one comes up because this one's an interesting, I can speak to the city of Montreal. If municipalities have large geomatic groups and they're struggling to think about BIM, they're not, the BIM side isn't as developed. And so for the city of Montreal, they've developed what they call street BIM for the geomatics group. And that's a way for them to wrap their heads around what does BIM mean for the city of Montreal. So it's a great sort of gateway into BIM and GIS. And so they're mapping their underground utilities. The city of Montreal is a complete mess underground. So this is a great use case, hoping to see it pop up to the top.
So they're mapping the streets calling it street mapping, but is it really GIS?
It's BIM. Yeah, they call it BIM for streets, but it's a combination of both. So you have very precise, objects, but also, of course, on large scales.
So I didn't happen to see the cards on that. So again, subsurface, everything we just talked about.
I think I just biased the sample
Yeah.
also by saying.
Lots of blue, but a couple purples in the back there. And I know, again, someone who isn't shy about getting on a microphone. Can we?
Yeah, there we go. Ivan is not shy, so he wants a mic.
Back corner.
He wants that.
Probably a little bit because we have a lot of this in place in Norway. So we already have a national database for geotechnics. And we also have, as also in Italy, most of our subsurface is a museum. So when we dig up, we have today, and we know that a lot of the countryside in Norway is clay and quick clay. So a lot of this is already in place for us. So it's probably a little bit therefore, I would say that it's not why we already will say it's the topic I want to.
It's already done, is what you're saying.
At least we have some systems in place, and we already inside. We have a national database. We are using GIS already in our systems, but when we're talking about project, they usually import a boreholes only into the system and then into a BIM tool, and from the BIM tool already.
Right. So I think I know the system in Norway, because when you start a project, you bring the site conditions, including what's below, into the. That's what we're talking about here. Not everybody is lucky to have that as you do. So it's not interesting to you, not because it's not interesting, but it is because you already have it. But the point is that, and I think in the United States, we have, and I think most of the world, especially when it comes to utilities, because utilities are not the responsibility of the public enterprise that's building the road or rail. It's actually in the private domain, and there are many utility companies. Coordination of utilities is a huge topic, and requiring utilities to actually map what they're putting down at a certain accuracy level is subsurface utility engineering in the United States. It's taken off in the last 15 years. We are building a very precise, including metadata on where utilities are located. So when we go, it's not a museum, or archaeological dig. We know where we're going. So I think it's an important topic.
No, it's definitely an important topic. I mean, the interest in subsurface, just if you follow the money and see where investments are going, there's a company just recently received, I think, $105 million Series A for their subsurface mapping technology. And I mean, they're a $1 billion valued company with only, I think, 3 customers so far. Okay, so now comes a little bit different bit of interaction. We're gonna jump over to Menti, and I am gonna guess that everyone has got a phone, and everyone's phone has a camera, and that camera should be able to capture that QR code and take you to Menti. And we're going to continue to get your input and your guidance, and a little bit more quantitative versus the qualitative card showing. So I'm going to jump over to Menti. I think that the QR code or the URL will still be there. We're still sharing. Everything's still good. Yeah. Okay.
Good.
All right. So first of all, want to know what buildingSMART domain you most closely associate. And I think one of the funny things about Menti is you need to scroll down, you answer your question, and at the very bottom is a little button that says submit.
Infrastructure.
Yeah. So please take a minute. And I know there's more than 25 people in the room here, and that's all that have voted so far. 3 people giving us thumbs up. All right. 27, 42, 43, keep going. Infrastructure, very heavily weighted. That's maybe not a surprise.
Buildings.
Yeah.
Coming strong.
Yeah, buildings behind that.
Very
Construction
early days of
domain.
voting.
Yeah.
So
No, this is great to see.
that corner is not voted yet.
Okay, come on, guys. Waving your phone doesn't mean anything. I can.
I'm just going to read the code, otherwise I'm.
Yes, very small. Just reading from left to right. Infrastructure at 30, railway at 9.
We know that we have some rail people.
Yes, definitely.
Some votes left.
I'm glad to see that. I mean, we've actually, one of the conversations we've had in a couple of circles is the infrastructure domain at buildingSMART being sort of the most effort around BIM and GIS, but the railway domain needs it. The buildings construction, certainly airports. Do we have airports on here? Yes, 2 people from airports. Okay. We'll actually show some airport examples later. Great, so that's nice to know. It might help us even guide some of our conversation. Know your audience is rule number one, right? Okay. So this is a little bit more work than just saying what domain you're in. On your screen, you should now be getting those 3 stories we talked about. Limited scope design development, large scale development, and subsurface. So from the perspective of how desirable, what kind of impact would addressing these use cases with BIM and GIS have on you in the industry? And then, kind of a gut feel, maybe you actually have more than a gut feel, maybe you understand technically how feasible, what is the effort to stitch the 2 together as it pertains to these 3 stories. So again, after you've voted, and you can skip, if this is again something that you just don't have a perspective on this particular area, then you can skip it. But we've got so far, that's great, 4, 7, 9 votes. Okay, so think about it for a second. Drag the little sliders over to what your impression is on desirability and feasibility. And it looks like we've got a question that has come in as well. What standards are used in GIS? IFC, GML? Yes? Yes?
So we can address that.
Yeah, I mean, do you want
Yeah.
to talk about an answer?
So I'll talk as the voting is going on, but I think what standards are in use, I think the roadmap emphasizes open standards where we can, to tie together the information domains. So obviously we all know IFC is at the forefront, and OGC has multiple standards that are open, and we'll, whatever makes sense for the use case is what we'll be fusing, whether it's City GML, Infra GML, whatever the standard is that needs to be brought over. So. But open standards is the main.
Yeah, and certainly in the case of Esri, and I know other GIS software developers, we import or transform proprietary formats, and we certainly import and utilize both the geometry and the attributes of IFC data in various applications that we develop.
And there's been a lot of mapping efforts, and so, for instance, I know our Finnish colleagues have done mapping between IFC and Infra GML, and so there's that if you're interested to look at those synergies.
Yeah, no, this is great. 71 votes, and I'm guessing we might have 100 people in the room. And if you came in late and didn't get cards, we can get them to you back there. There's a few of you maybe that still need cards, and we'd love to get every vote. Every vote counts, as they say, especially in these election years.
We have some clear.
Yeah, that means this is pretty clear. So I mean, what this tells us is no surprise based on the conversation we already had that large-scale development seems to have the highest desirability in that it'll make the most impact and perceived to be feasible to bring the 2 together. All right. We'll be coming back to this, so don't lose your phone. Actually,
Do you want to do the other mentees?
yeah, let's.
And while you're pulling that up, let me explain.
Right. So, large scale development. So, we're talking to you about use cases, but you might have your own perception of what a use or story is, or a certain capability. So, if we could actually get you to weigh in, again, on Menti, you should just have a text box and take a minute or 2.
So what we're really asking for here is forget about use cases and all the jargon. Within this particular information use or use case that we presented, what is your story? What do you want to do or connect? Especially from where you sit, what is your need? What is your story in terms of data connection? That's what we're trying to get at. It's just an open text input. The idea is that stories actually lead to use cases in the aggregate, and those use cases then bubble up to something higher that we can solve globally as a problem. So we really are asking for your input on, within this particular use case, on large-scale development, what is your particular information use or data connection story that you have? So maybe 5 minutes?
Yeah.
A few minutes at
Yes,
least.
a few minutes, and yeah, glad to see a couple answers already. So, and again, we are still in the GIS coming into a BIM environment. And this was the topic that the crowd here weighed in on, that large-scale development was most important. Great, yes.
And you can think about a couple of things. I know, so use case is a loaded term in the buildingSMART. There's a use case management tool and everything. So purpose, roles, transactions, exchanges. So I think any of these can sort of be helpful if you're blocked. So one or all three of these aspects can be interesting to note. So what purposes are you looking for? Oh.
It looks like a few more questions have also come in, which greatly appreciate. Thank you for making this a two-way street here. Are GIS standards fit for purpose for AECO? Short answer, yes. I mean, I'm not sure which standards you might be referring to, but I see projects from earliest phases of planning into design and engineering, construction, over to operation, long-term facilities management. We'll get into some of those, utilizing all the capabilities of GIS, spatial analytics, asset management, understanding, more than just geography, but data that typically doesn't render well in a spreadsheet, but needs to be, on a map to convey, AEC concerns.
I guess maybe a question is, are we seeing these standards being implemented in software, sort of more building or asset-oriented software? I guess I don't know if that was a part of the question. Are we really just two domains and two sets of tools that sort of touch just a little? So I don't know if you can speak to, do we see these standards in?
So I think, so for example, I come from the infrastructure. We have in the OpenGIS community, the city GML, standard, for example, is highly useful. In fact, we do have a comparison between the city GML data model and IFC. Actually, we do that so that we can have data fungible across the two information domains. So for me, it's fit for purpose for AECO. Whether it's used in software today, that's the problem we want to solve. It's really, when we get the BIM and GIS practitioners to come together and say, this is how we encode the information in our open standard, this is how we do it, we have more semantic alignment at the object level. And we are not there yet. We don't have the tools interoperably use the standards, but in reality, when you open the shell, I think CityGML, at least from the roads perspective, has objects that are identical to IFC 4.3. So I think, I'm sure in other domains there are, but from my experience, yes, they are fit for purpose. They're not used extensively in software. So.
A couple more questions were here before we jump ahead. What is the objective of this exercise? The use cases are interesting, but someone needs to build the databases, and that is not the role of buildingSMART International. Jag, do you want to jump on that?
Yeah. So I think maybe just from the roadmap perspective, the use of the exercise is informing us. I said the roadmap was user-driven, use case-driven. If we find large enough problems globally, the idea is, I don't know if we want to build, I don't think the purpose is to build a database. The purpose is education on information modeling, education for the standards development organization, education to the software industry that we do need to solve this problem, large scale development where we move assets. I think you saw the user stories. We need to bring assets into the BIM environment. That's not something that we specify today. We don't do it. We do it as a ad hoc, but we don't have an industry-wide standard on that. So I don't think the purpose is to do databases. The purpose is to educate and develop capability to be able to develop tools and databases to support this. So,
and I would say from a software developer's point of view, my role is to be a storyteller for Esri about GIS into the AEC industry and to somewhat be the voice of the industry back into the company. We have product managers who are tasked with developing the next great feature that hopefully leads to software being purchased. So when I can go back to our software developers and say, we did this exercise and these 9 stories were shared and these 2 got great interest and here's some supporting details around them, that's ammunition for them to then prioritize what they work on. So is it the next great way of drawing a polygon, or is it the next great way of bringing road information from a BIM tool into GIS? This gives them the data and the details so that product development can happen to fulfill these use cases. This is gold for for a software development company. So thank you for.
But I don't know if, I mean, BSI does have a use case management tool. And so I think there's a place where this can reside. And I think the purpose is actually, and I see Clive and Ian here, I don't know if it's not the role, I think it is the role of BSI to map these and make these public.
Aren't feasibility and effort contradictory? Ah, yeah, that's the two vectors that you've been asked to weigh in on.
Feasibility is effort.
Yeah. See, desirability
is
with
impact.
Effort, yeah, impact. Right.
So desirability, so it is feasible. So I guess maybe it's all terminology here. Desirability is impact. That yes, if you do this, it has impact. Like I even talked about, we have information about subsurface when we do projects. That's gold. I mean, but it's desirable. It may not be feasible because it does take effort, and you need to work with a lot of people to bring utility data into a centralized database. So really what we're measuring in feasibility is, what do you think where you sit within your organization or within the domain? What are the challenges to bring this together in your just informal opinion right now? So feasibility is equal to the effort required to make that use case happen, at least in the way we defined it. So that's a clarification.
And yeah, and they're also, these are quite subjective values, you know, dragging a bar from 1 to 5. There's not science behind that, but it is going to help us with prioritization. So thank you for pages of feedback, which is exactly what we wanted. Thank you. Okay. So that was GIS into BIM. There's certainly a whole nother, realm or multiple realms worth talking about here. Urban planning. So this is bringing your BIM content, your BIM models, your BIM details into a GIS environment. So urban planning is typically larger scale. It involves, regional concepts. The consumers of urban planning are everyone, as opposed to perhaps the consumers of a design exercise might just be an individual owner or an individual team. Urban planning impacts everybody. So support urban planning and regional development by exporting building and facility information from BIM models into GIS. So this again is the show of cards. Blue meaning, most important, something buildingSMART should focus on. Green being sort of middle of the road. Purple is, this just is not, an area that we need to spend energy on, and red is, I just don't understand this. So votes. Blues, 1 red, some green, no purple. So that's interesting. So it's, almost unanimously, at least heavily. Sorry?
We got a red.
We got a couple reds, but that's because they might not, be in the area of urban planning and just don't want to weigh in. That's fine. That's great, in fact. Okay. Operations maintenance. So still BIM content making its way into a GIS-like view, a contextual view, a map view, to improve the maintenance process by exporting that BIM information into GIS, enabling operations and maintenance teams to access information and take necessary actions promptly. I mean, you certainly don't need GIS for operations and maintenance, but is that element of the details of BIM coming into a location-based, contextually aware, spatially analyzed kind of environment that GIS enables? What do you, what's your, individual feel for the importance of this kind of use case?
And this one's interesting because, I mean, when you look at who operates buildings and, asset owners typically are larger, will have campuses, will have multiple buildings. So this is where you can sort of see really a lot of value around planning, operations planning, maintenance planning, and typically asset management software and all that. It's a series of software tools. And so to have BIM sort of plays nice with certain asset management software tools, but if you look at it from a planning and a location, you can think about a university campus or a healthcare campus that you have that large scale, and you need that information around location and planning, around getting to areas and so forth. So I think this one's an interesting one. not trying to bias the crowd either.
But you did.
Just,
No,
I-
buildings. I mean, think about the linear infrastructure too, where
Yeah.
I think this is very important to think about from a maintenance perspective for linear infrastructure. We do need BIM model information back into GIS. So, no, that's
Well, yeah, I mean,
You can't vote on GIS and buildings and GIS and infrastructure maintenance in the same use case.
so the comment here, just because we might not be picking that up, is can you vote the same way on this use case related to vertical construction and the maintenance of it versus a linear highway, a road? And the point is they are two different. Okay, and that's a good point of feedback, that this might need to be bifurcated into two stories. So with that in mind, again, show of hands, show of cards. This use case as one that buildingSMART and BSI and OGC perhaps work together to evaluate. So, Roger.
No, I think I have to sort of, we have a cross-tab analysis. We know where you're coming from, Roger. So if buildings votes purple and roads vote blue, we know where you're coming from. So I'd say vote generally, we'll sort it out later on.
Okay, we're gonna ask the guy here with the two cards.
Oh, two cards, there we go.
Yeah, Roger as well. So microphone.
But you're from buildings, Roger, you can't have two cards. So,
No. National Institute of Building Sciences. Building does not necessarily just mean vertical. Another two cards. It was back towards the back. Yeah. I mean, was your feedback the same thing, that it was?
Yeah, kind of. I think it depends on the project, right?
Yes.
That's a takeaway here. I can think we are working with a renewable energy company right now, right? So for them, have the project located in a geographical environment absolutely is key for operation, right? But if I think of McDonald's, I don't really care, right? So I think it's not infrastructure versus, well, you can consider infrastructure the renewable energy, right? But it's not linear infrastructure neither. So I think it depends on whether that facility is somehow affected by the environment and when it's operated. I think that could have a little bit more of a purpose for this operations and maintenance, whether if you're not really affected by the environment, maybe it's not key to your workflow, right?
Sure.
I don't know if it makes sense.
Hold on. Get you a microphone. I know that you're good with the mic there,
yeah,
Chris.
I think it makes sense.
So I'm a geographer, so you should expect this question as an extension to the comment. What piece of infrastructure, whether it's horizontal or vertical, is not affected by its environment?
Mic drop.
I mean, this is part of the challenge, right? Is understanding the interconnectedness of the built asset with its natural environment and how society and humanity moves across it or within it or around it. Everything's so deeply interconnected, I don't see that there's any infrastructure that isn't affected somehow by its contextual environment and by the other things that it interconnects with.
Back of the room.
I think it's also very much important to think about the information, because large infrastructure owners already have an asset maintenance database. But we need to connect that information as well into the GIS system. It's not necessarily coming directly from BIM, because the BIM might have put it into the asset database first. Right. And that's also important to think about. So we have to think about where the information is when we go to the asset operations phase as well.
Well, to that point, that's it. So we have so many systems, and asset management is its own domain. You know, it's we have BIM and GIS here, but asset management is a domain unto itself. And so to the McDonald's point, I agree. You know, one asset is something, but if you have 25 located on a large scale, you want to manage that and make sure your teams are as efficient as possible. So,
okay.
There is nuance here, but yeah, I think that the point is we're surfacing nuance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is great conversation, great feedback, and in the spirit of time, we're about half. Oh, yes.
You say export the relevant BIM data to GIS, but isn't it just possible to visualize the IFC in a GIS software without exporting it in a different, of converting it or
Yeah, that's a
just
good,
show the
that's a good
IFC
point.
in
And
the
that-
GIS.
That might be, you know, an element of semantics there. Exporting may not be necessary. A direct read from a repository of IFC files is not really an import-export, it's just reading it.
Okay.
But the point is that we are, you know, in this case, primarily in a GIS-based view as opposed to perhaps a BIM authoring, BIM modeling, BIM proprietary application.
And if I have a project, I have like 30 suppliers with BIM models, and if you give access to those BIM models in a federated way, then you need a kind of data space how to connect all those servers from that one particular project. So, and I think to get access to all the construction BIM models, that's the most difficult part, because that's most of the time inside the company, so they don't share it because certain rights or I think that's a difficult part.
Certainly, no, there's certainly the idea of a
It's not public
connected data
data.
environment, a common data environment, and how it intersects with all these use cases is certainly, you know, another level of challenge. All right, let's keep going. This is very similar. Jag and I talked about this one before starting the session. Facility management. So if the last one was operations and maintenance, this is perhaps the more strategic side of managing those facilities or those assets. You know, the term might be facility, but again, let's try to consider it to be, you know, a line of rail, a roadway corridor, a utility system. It's not necessarily just a vertical building. So to facilitate effective strategic management, visualization, analysis by, again, bringing the BIM model into GIS. So maybe it's space planning or lease planning or energy analysis or determining whether to decommission versus expanding a building or facility or roadway. Resilience, sustainability, yeah. So show of cards, and I know a few people have come in maybe that didn't get cards. So blue, this is really important. Green, middle of the road. Purple, let's not worry about it. There's other things to put our energy into. Okay. So a few purples and more greens than we had seen maybe. Okay. Anyone want to weigh in their thoughts on why this one in particular, you know, they voted the way they did? Okay. We will jump to Menti again. So to perform the similar exercise, 47 responses to that last one. That's great.
We hope 50 this.
Yeah, let's go for 50. Okay, so.
And Roger has two. Sure.
All right, so this was, again, BIM into GIS. We started out talking about urban planning, and then the operations, maintenance side of things, and then facility management. So again, using those two vectors, you know, we know it's subjective, but still what, you know, from your seat, the work that you do, the teams that you work with, how feasible would it be to bring together BIM into these GIS environments? And then what kind of impact would it have? How desirable is this type of workflow, use case, capability? So we got a few votes coming in.
A long expected line.
Yeah. A little bit of a horse race there, though.
Yeah, a little bit of a
Yeah,
horse
yeah.
race.
And again, if these, you know, if one of these topics just is one that you don't have an opinion on, don't feel forced to vote on it. You can skip it. And that way the data won't be skewed.
A lot of thumbs ups.
Yeah.
Some in red.
Yep. 35 votes. That's about half of the last one. I
Is
think.
there a scheme for the thumbs up? Some are in different colors.
I don't know. I think that's kind of random.
Red.
Yeah. Yeah. Blue, green. I don't know. Ooh, lots of thumbs up there.
I think
Okay.
it depends on their card.
Maybe so. Where they're sitting. Okay. Great. So yeah, almost 50 responses. Looks like another question has come in as well. Let's just take a look at that. Yeah, answered. What's the difference between operation and maintenance and facility management? Yeah. Again, I think that the key word there is strategic planning might be the facility management, and more tactical maintenance, keeping assets up and running, fixing things that break or fixing them before they break is what we need. Inspecting and fixing for operations and strategic planning for facility management, if we had to divide those two. Okay. So 55, that's the majority of the room. And looks like urban planning, slightly more desirable and a little bit more feasible, but yeah, these are close.
You want to pick one?
Yeah. Urban planning,
Yeah.
since it's the math. So let's just take another couple of minutes amongst yourselves and do like what we did a few minutes ago. Stories. So what stories support this use case? What situations, would you benefit from, your team, your company, the people around you, if BIM and GIS came together for the sake of urban planning? Where would you see the value of the details of BIM being placed in context to help make decisions around urban planning and maybe even say urban design?
This is a great one for sort of democratization of the sort of urban planning process. I think there's great use cases around actually providing and rendering and giving information to non-technical folks and getting them involved in planning decisions. There's a lot of great use cases of being able to, maybe even do augmented reality or something like that around a project to get some social acceptability and raise awareness. I know that-that's something that we used to do in Vancouver around, there was a lot of regulations around sightlines, and not that you couldn't block the view to the mountains on the North Shore. And so just having being able to position buildings within context and see and actually position yourself and look at and simulate the impact of a proposed development is an interesting one for urban planning and development.
And as I mentioned earlier, the consumers of urban planning are the everyday person. Mary sitting at her house wondering how she's going to be impacted by some new building that's coming up, or a greenway.
Or opposed, or opposed to a lot of NIMBY discussions.
Yep.
Maybe it's a good way to get those people on board.
Right. Information is power. Another question, let's just jump over to that before. Maybe BIM and GIS so clear that are used together would be a better characterization. I think that's actually our next group. It might be what you're getting at, is that it's not necessarily BIM in GIS or GIS in BIM, but the two of them together. That might be the point you're making here, that BIM and GIS together is a characterization, and it's not one leading and one consuming, but the two coming together. And I think we're going to get into that in just a minute here. So
there was a lot of debate, and Jag, you can speak to this, around the title of the roadmap. Is it integration? Is it liaison? And it fell on connection.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we did debate this quite a bit, and we ended up with connections, because I think, as I said, we do realize that tooling will do what it has to represent the real world. The idea is to be able to connect it. So I think it is definitely something we wrestled with. I don't think we have a clear answer. So.
Yeah, I have said multiple times in multiple places, I'll get into arguments with people at Esri, where does GIS start and end, and where does BIM start and end? And we show these examples of consuming BIM information, performing spatial analysis against it, and then perhaps taking that data into a downstream workflow. Where did the BIM end and where did the GIS start when you bring these two together? So this next few minutes actually will be a few examples of that. So blurring the lines of BIM and GIS. So whoever asked that question, thank you for that segue into this portion. This idea of model as a legal document is catching on, certainly in the US. I'll be involved in a workshop. Ian, before even getting any details, raising his hand. No surprise there. Yeah, the idea that you would have, moving away from, paper-based permitting and approvals and paper-based being the basis of contracts, but actually into models that we trust, that are secure, that are the source of truth, just opens the door for so many more workflows. And typically that's going to mean your BIM information, the details that come from a BIM authoring tool in a GIS environment, able to be queried and explored and understood and used as perhaps a means of accessing additional asset information. It just opens the door to new workflows, new productivity, new risks, certainly. So supporting the adoption of model-based collaboration in lieu of paper PDF methods, combining BIM models with GIS, resulting in a federated design model established as a legal document. So show of hands, or any questions about this? Because this is kind of cutting edge, leading edge concepts.
And this one is, regardless of the scale of the asset that you're planning, you need this connection. Like if at the billing level, you need the cadastre, you need all the legal information, you need the bylaws that are, so this is regardless of scale. And I think this is where we're getting at.
Got some light blues.
Yeah.
So can I maybe ask a question? Maybe Erik, maybe you can answer. I'm not from the buildings world, and probably Marc, you too. There is a big project in the EU called CHECK. We had them present on digital building permits, 3-year project, and they're coming up with this toolkit with GIS and BIM integrated toolkit. So permitting is certainly a legal document. It's not just a construction contract. It's also digital permits for buildings. So I think, does that fit within this? Because I can see buildings people probably have more people weigh in with a blue card. So I just want to expand the definition. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, I think we want to be as broad.
Yeah.
And maybe throw a microphone back to Ian, who raised his hand with a blue card before I even finished the word model as legal document, to weigh in. I know that you're a strong proponent of the topic.
So it goes to the maturity and evolution of BIM. I think what we've seen in the vertical space is first adoption of BIM and optimization of BIM tools to produce a set of documents. Because that's the way we worked, that's what we were used for, and you can sign and seal a set of documents. It's interesting that in the vertical space, in the horizontal industry, where the adoption of BIM in the US has come much later, the question that they pose to themselves is, if we have a BIM model, why do we need to also produce a set of documents? Because if we're talking about information management, the information needed for permitting, the information needed for analysis, the information needed for approvals is actually in the BIM model. So do we even need to produce the documents? Is that a paradigm we can leave behind? So in a way, it's a bit like the adoption of wireless technology. Some countries didn't have cable, didn't have fiber, and they were so-called behind the rest of the world. When we went wireless, they were first. It was like a leap ahead, because there was not a requirement to hang on to that legacy view. So I think as we have more sophistication around modeling, as we have the ability to have trusted data in the model, then there is a new opportunity to skip this idea that you must have a set of documents which are the source of so much contradiction and so many change orders. At the end of the day, a document set produces a lot of the problems that we see in construction and operations and maintenance.
And I think, Ian, you put it so well. There is a big part of any building project that requires environmental permitting, which is the longest part of project delivery, which is not even talked about. But I think there is an opportunity here to accelerate, in addition to removing the need for documentation, through information, digitization of information, and actually moving it through the digitalized world. So I think there is permitting definitely is part of, I think, the definition of producing legally binding documents that can be used for conversations and for regulatory approvals, as part of construction. It's not just the construction document, it's also the permitting documents, I think. So well said.
Okay. Right. Next topic, still around this area of blurring BIM and GIS. I've seen numerous examples where, again, the lines are blurred. Where did the GIS come into play and where did the BIM stop? Bringing the information types together, combining it with scheduling and cost management, logistics, supplier information. around construction collaboration. So supporting the build phase of a project by leveraging BIM models with GIS for detailed location-aware planning, combining GIS with BIM to improve site-derived data in a BIM model context. You know, I've said numerous times, you know, there's probably is not a more complex supply chain situation than a construction project, bringing together hundreds, potentially thousands of companies who need to bring thousands, potentially tens of thousands of materials together at the right time, and then people at the right time to put those pieces into place. That is a very location-based challenge. And yet GIS in the realm of construction management is somewhat new. It's one of the fastest growing areas that we're seeing at Esri, because I think that recognition of where am I going to build this thing? Where am I going to pour my concrete? What am I going to, you know, where is my laydown area going to be relative to the rest of the site? And certainly for large scale alternative energy projects, windmills, solar farms, for example. So in this realm of construction collaboration, GIS and BIM coming together in this blurred environment, maybe just a show of hands, and I think this might be indicative of who's in the room. Roger with 2 cards. Yeah, green. Anyone else? I'm just, again, if you don't have a vote here because you're not in construction, that's fine. I don't want swaying the votes, but yeah, a lot of blues, a lot of greens. Like, yeah, okay. Great. No purple, yeah. Oh, okay. Marc, do you want to talk again?
Thanks. Yeah, I put purple up because it's not like we haven't been building things without this.
Sorry?
It's not like we haven't been building stuff without GIS data. So
Yeah.
I think it's a new, as you said, it's a growing area, but it's not going to revolutionize stuff. We're going to still carry on building without GIS because that's what the majority of people do.
Well, we've been building for thousands of years before we had computers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was being devil's advocate, basically.
Of course, of course. All right. Last topic here, digital as-builting. The example on the screen here is San Francisco Airport, which is one of the best examples of an owner-operator who have brought together BIM and GIS, GIS and BIM, dashboards, views of their environment for space planning, for safety, for monitoring every single one of their 11,000 light bulbs, and doing that by requiring their consultants to deliver the CAD and BIM data so it drops in like a puzzle piece into the enormous project that is San Francisco Airport. So the benefits of ensuring digital as-builting by requiring not just BIM standards, but GIS, geolocation standards be adhered to, just opens the door for them to be a flagship in the realm of owners utilizing digital technology. I don't know if either of you want to expand on the topic of.
Well, this goes back to the life cycle, and so we talked about operations and facility maintenance, and of course this is a critical step in ensuring that. And we're looking at, you know, we're working of course with the university in Montreal and large portfolio asset owners that they're struggling with this process, this handover process, and why there's support for the AOH. And I'm hoping to see synergies between, you know, the AOH project at BSI and this approach of BIM GIS integration or connection, I should say, because it's such a critical step. It's so critical in making sure that we get value across the life cycle of an asset to get this information.
Yeah, I think you just gave the example of buildings. I have to say, I put a plug in for next week. There is a very large virtual event in the US on digital as-building in the roads sector. There is no better, so we don't consider as-building has traditionally been at the end of a construction project, you hand over a document. Digital as-building is something very different. It is dynamic, it lives as a living record of what's being built as the construction project is progressing, enabling payments to the contractor, so there's a win for the contractor, enabling records to be kept, and the digital twin to be produced, if you can use that word, I don't like the word, as the project is being built, and then handed off as a digital record. So clearly both GIS and BIM information needs to come together. So there's tremendous work happening in the industry, in the horizontal infrastructure sector right now, including also in the building sector. So I just want to put a plug in before they vote.
Yes, yes.
Vote it down. So.
And start to see some two cards. Question before we,
Karen had some.
yes.
No, I just, because we're looking into this at the moment with some of our large infrastructure project in Sweden. And I think it's important also then to explore the functionalities of the GIS tool, the functionalities that we've traditionally had in the design phase of analyzing alignments and all these additional things that we do in infrastructure, horizontal infrastructure. And I think we do need some of those functionalities in the tools, just to be able to find a real benefits of it, really.
Okay. So, Arvind in the back? Ivan.
I think, as I mentioned, when it comes to operation maintenance, when we talk about as built or as is, we're talking about 95% of the information that we are changing is alphanumerical information, not geometrical information. So if you can manage to separate where the geometric information and where the alphanumerical information is, it will be easier because you don't have to have the models to update it, because you can store the information in another place, have an API connection into the model where you have all the information. That way you can update the information through plugins in that system, but it's just saved where it's supposed to be saved. I think that also will help.
So I think it's a very good point. And this is where it comes together, because it starts, let's say, every project that has a design aspect to it has geometry and alphanumerical information. What needs to which is generally done in GIS, but then you have to come back to geometry alterations in a design model with design survey. But that's kind of rare, but it happens and it needs to be noted. The majority of what needs to be updated or verified is the alphanumeric information, but that should be in the BIM model before it can get into a GIS tooling. That's never a requirement today. This use case is shining a spotlight to say that we need this information, that tools need to support it. There should be an integrated requirement that this is continuous along the construction project and beyond. So I think it's a very good point. That demonstrates the value of this use case.
So this will be your last showing of cards, the importance of digital.
Roger to be blue.
Sorry?
Roger to be one.
You put and in there.
Yes. Cards, blue, some greens, mostly blues. Yeah, this is probably one of the highest blue rated cards. So as we did in the last two examples, we're going to jump over to Menti. And again, with the purpose to get you to weigh in on these three use cases: the model's legal document, construction collaboration, digital as-builting. Hit the QR code or menti.com. You can see the number up at the very top there. Another question or two has come in, a thumbs up, and we'll give you a minute or two here. And based on card raises, the first few votes, no surprise that that last topic is the.
As we move ahead, I think once we get into, and I'm speaking from the building side and thinking about our university, is we're starting to see point places, interventions in specific areas and renovations, and keeping sort of pieces of the model, the sort of the campus information model updated. Its location is really important, and just georeferencing everything and taking pieces out and putting them back in once in the hospital is the same thing. You're going to build the hospital completely once, but over the years you're going to sort of maintain and might renovate specific aspects. So having this location information and to be able to situate the intervention on a smaller scale, and Quebec, the roadmap and that sort of is assembling these large public owners. they say, well, you build a big asset once, so the large $50, $100 million project, you build it once, but once you get down the road and you get to a point in time where it's a $500,000 project, a $1 million renovation project, you'll need the smaller players to come on board, and they'll have to integrate into this model and be able to, contribute back into the model and locate and put their information back into this as-built model and keep it maintained. So we have to think of it not just as a one single as-built handover, but a continuous series of handovers over time. So
yeah, that reminds me of a diagram very early in the days of before buildingSMART, IAI, a diagram I think that Ian had put together showing the life cycle of the project and just the many times along that life cycle, the total cost of operation of, yeah, you build it once, but you are rebuilding your project multiple times. And what is the estimates? 70 to 80% of the total cost of operations over its life cycle versus the 20% in that first loading.
So thinking you're going to maintain this monolithic model, and just update that I don't think makes sense. It has to be structured and thought of in a way that's modular and extensible.
So this was just a question that came up. Does facilities management include management of cracks and displacement of structures? I think in our ranking, that would have been the operations and maintenance, whereas facilities management, we were talking more about strategic. So maybe it's the strategy to keep the cracks from happening in the first place. But just wanted to get that last question answered.
That's interesting. I think, inspection of assets and now we're seeing, drones and trying to see that over time and locating. That's another probably potential use case we need to look in.
Okay. So again, no surprise based on the card raised for this last series of 3 questions, that digital as-built, highest desirability and perceived to be most feasible. So one last bit of homework here for you is to, considering, classwork, not homework, classwork. Yeah, we're not going to send you home with homework, I don't think, is considering this particular use case, this particular scenario, what real world problems would be solved by the blurring of BIM and GIS, asset information, in a location-based environment, all the details that BIM provides being contextual to the site and the capabilities that GIS provides, the geotechnical information being available, in a road type project, infrastructure, horizontal infrastructure project. So we can just get a few thoughts on, again, digital as-builting and GIS and BIM, location details and detailed BIM, both geometry and attributes coming together. What kind of benefits, what kind of scenarios would you benefit from? Interesting scenario spelled out there. Let's see another question while you all are filling in your answers there. Models of legal document has huge implications as a barrier to entry. For example, planning submissions and subsequent records retention. Models of legal document has implications as a barrier to entry. Barrier to entry for whom? Who wants to? That was you again? Okay, Eric. All right.
Do you want me to explain why I said that?
Yeah.
Well, everybody in this room could be a applicant for a building permit. You want to extend your house, you want to move a tree or something, you can submit that as a PDF document today. If it means you've got to buy a copy of Revit, get a subscription to Esri, do a markup, do it in 3D, send it to your planning authority, who then have to host and manage that data, then you have a big problem.
Okay.
So I think it's a case-based submission for model as a legal document, but we shouldn't get away from the fact that the vast proportion of the built environment can't work in that way. Of course, I'm an advocate for doing it, but let's not get away from the fact that every single local authority is not going to be able to manage that data, and it's population won't be able to submit models.
True, everyone isn't going to get a copy of a BIM authoring tool for whatever small project, but what if instead those municipalities were hosting an environment that showed their city and you click on the tree that you want a permit to cut down or a driveway that you want to expand, and without opening up a BIM application, this model is updated and the permit is executed and you're either accepted or denied without ever putting a piece of paper together.
I agree, but it ain't going to happen in a hurry.
Not with that attitude, Marc. All right. So great, 20 or so, 21 responses to this particular topic. Great responsiveness, great feedback. Thank you, everyone, for your input. So each of you have 4 cards. 4 cards aren't going to do you any good. So please leave them at your seat. We're going to collect them, recollate them into stacks of cards. Hit the QR code here. It'll fill in a form, and randomly we'll pick and either give out later tonight or tomorrow, if you're still here, one of the 18 decks of Uno cards that we've put together for this particular exercise. Any closing thoughts, or
I really appreciate everybody participating. This is actually a great start for the roadmap. We can actually take it to Delft and share it with our OGC partners. And hopefully some of these will resonate and we'll bring it back to buildingSMART. So it's really a start of collecting from all of you who have deep insights into buildingSMART and the way it works and your domains. Your information and your knowledge. So really thank you, Marc, and also Erik for supporting this. And thank you all for actually enthusiastically participating. So I really appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, this could have either gone over really well, like I think did, or it could have been an absolute failure.
A disaster, but it
Thank
did.
you for making it go great.
Yes. And I do want to say that if any of you from the various domains, we have Marc from the infrastructure domain leading the charge on the integration. Anyone from all the other domains on buildingSMART want to step up and be a part of the champion team on the joint working group. Ian's in the room. I think at some point, Ian and Scott Simmons from OGC will get together and we'll figure out, or Clive, figure out the joint leadership team. And so if you are interested, please see me or Marc or Erik. Greg's at the back. He was part of the roadmap as well. Greg, raise your hand, please. So he always raises his hand. So please let us know if you're interested. We hope you are and you'll participate in these discussions. So thanks.
Thank you.